When I first moved to the small, wooded town of Willoughby, I wasn't expecting much. It was the kind of place where the streets had no names, just numbers, and the forest crept so close to the houses that you could barely tell where the yards ended and the wilderness began. My new job as a freelance editor had afforded me the flexibility to leave the city, and Willoughby seemed like a peaceful, if uneventful, retreat. It was the kind of town where time seemed to move slower, where the days blended together under the canopy of rustling leaves. That was before I saw the house. It was a few weeks into my stay. The late autumn air was crisp, and the leaves had begun to turn, painting the landscape in deep reds and oranges. The forest surrounding Willoughby was dense, the kind of wilderness that seemed to have a personality of its own. I'd been walking my dog, Lola, down one of the narrow dirt roads near my rental when I noticed it, a house so quiet it felt wrong. Not no people inside quiet. Not the owners are away on vacation quiet. This was something else. Something deeper, like the silence of a held breath before a scream. The house sat back from the road, obscured by tall, ancient oaks whose gnarled branches twisted together like skeletal fingers. It was unremarkable at first glance, just another aging Victorian with peeling paint, sagging shutters, and an overgrown lawn choked with weeds. But the silence was oppressive. It didn't matter how loud the wind was blowing or how many birds chirped in the trees. The moment you got close to that house, the world seemed to mute itself. Even Lola stopped barking, her ears flattening against her head as she whimpered and tried to pull me back toward the road. I couldn't stop looking at it. The windows were dark, but I swear I felt eyes on me as I stood there, just staring like an idiot. There was no movement inside, no sound of a TV or footsteps on the porch. Still, the longer I lingered, the more I felt like something, or someone, was waiting for me to get closer. The air around the house was colder than the rest of the forest, sharp enough to sting my lungs. I shook off the feeling and hurried home, tugging Lola along behind me, her whimpers cutting through the unnatural quiet. A few days later, I mentioned the house to my neighbor, Beth, an older woman who'd lived in Willoughby her whole life. She went pale the moment I described it. "You stay away from there," she said, gripping my arm so tightly it hurt. "You hear me? Don't even look at it." "Why?" I asked, half laughing, trying to shake off the chill that had followed me home. "It's just a creepy old house." Beth didn't smile. Her expression was grim, her eyes darting to the window as if she were afraid the house could hear us from miles away. "It's not empty," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And it's not abandoned. But no one lives there." I thought she was being dramatic, but she wasn't the only one. Everyone in town climbed up the second I brought up the house. The bartender at the local pub told me it had been empty for decades, but when I pressed him, he just shook his head and muttered something about the quiet. Another woman I met at the market outright refused to talk about it, practically running away when I asked if anyone had lived there recently. Their reactions were unnerving, their fear palpable, like they all knew something I didn't. The silence around the house only made me more curious. That night, I decided to go back. The air felt heavier as I approached the house, like the silence was pressing down on me. The streetlights didn't reach this far, and the only light came from the moon filtering through the trees, casting long, spindly shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. I stood at the edge of the property, staring up at the dark windows that now seemed to glare back at me, daring me to step closer. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually, I saw it, a faint glow from one of the upstairs rooms. It wasn't the warm, yellow light of a lamp or candle. This was pale, almost green, like the sickly glow of a computer screen. It flickered faintly, then went out, leaving me blinking in the darkness. I stepped closer, the crunch of leaves underfoot sounding unnaturally loud in the suffocating quiet. The silence grew so thick I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The ground felt soft underfoot, like I was walking on something that wasn't quite solid. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and decay, a scent that clung to the back of my throat. My skin prickled as I reached the front porch, the boards creaking softly beneath me. I didn't plan to go inside, just to look through one of the windows. That was my excuse, anyway. As I leaned toward the glass, the quiet broke. A loud thud echoed from inside the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and heading toward the door. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The footsteps stopped just on the other side, and I swear I heard something breathing. It was deep and ragged, the sound of lungs straining against the weight of centuries. Then the doorknob began to turn. I don't remember running home, but when I woke up the next morning, I was in my bed, my clothes still damp with dew. Lola wouldn't stop barking at the door, her hackles raised and her tail between her legs. It took me hours to calm her down, and even then, she refused to leave my side, her eyes constantly darting to the windows. I tried to forget about the house after that, but it wouldn't let me. Every time I walked past the end of that road, I felt it pulling at me, like it was waiting. I started having nightmares about the green light and the sound of footsteps chasing me down endless hallways. Sometimes, I'd wake up and find muddy footprints leading from my bed to the front door. The house wasn't just a structure. It was alive, a pulsing entity that fed on the silence it imposed. The oppressive quiet wasn't a lack of sound, it was a presence, a vacuum that drew in anything that lingered too long. It wanted me. I don't know why, but it wanted me. Each time I passed by, the pull grew stronger. The glow in the windows became more frequent, sometimes accompanied by shadows moving just out of sight. The footsteps in my dreams echoed louder, as if they were no longer confined to the house. The line between dream and reality blurred. I'd wake to find myself at the end of the dirt road, staring at the house in the dead of night, unable to remember how I got there. I tried to avoid the road altogether, taking longer routes to avoid its gaze. But it didn't matter. The house had claimed me, tethering itself to me like a shadow I couldn't escape. One night, I woke to a deafening silence. The kind that feels unnatural, as if every sound had been drained from the world. Even Lola, usually restless, lay frozen under the bed, her eyes wide with fear. The green glow filled my room, brighter than it had ever been. I turned to the window, and there it was. The house. It shouldn't have been there, but it was. The entire structure loomed just outside, its dark windows now glowing, alive with some terrible intent. I could feel it, its hunger, its longing. And I realized then that the house wasn't content with staying where it was. It was coming for me. The walls of my room trembled, the silence pressing in until it felt like my eardrums would burst. And then, as the glow reached its peak, I heard it. A voice, low and resonant, echoing from every corner of the room, "Come home." I don't know how much longer I can resist. The quiet house is no longer waiting for me to return. It's coming to claim me, to pull me into its suffocating silence. And I'm not sure I want to fight it anymore. If you ever find yourself in Willoughby and you see a house that seems too quiet, too still, turn around. Walk away. Because once it notices you, it never lets go.